So, it was the middle of spring of 2014, and I had just started my first ever real job working at a gas station. It wasn't a hard job, the pay was good for a 19-year-old, and even though the job required long hours of standing, it was worth it to say the least. I worked the night shift for most nights as I had classes during the day, so I'd be busy for most nights. It was a very chill job, and my boss even allowed me to catch up on some homework when the place was dead. Most nights, you'd have very few people come in to get gas, and most of them just came in for a beer. The station was located in a rural side of my city, so it wasn't too populated. One night, the person working after me had called in sick, and my boss had asked me to cover for his shift. I was a bit annoyed, to say the least, but I needed the extra pay and there was no way I would turn down overtime pay. Fast forward to around 2 a.m. I was sitting in my chair working on a crossword puzzle when I hear the front door open and see a man walk in. He was very tall and buff and had a long scratchy beard. Being a guy from the city, it was weird to say the least, but it's the country, so it wasn't uncommon to see people like this. I gave him a quick nod to say hello, but he genuinely didn't seem to notice or care. Seeing as the station was located in not such a great area, it wasn't uncommon to have rude and shady people come in once in a while. A minute later, he comes up to the counter with a 6-pack of beer and I tell him his total. He puts his hand in his pocket and proceeds to hand me a dirty, torn up $100 bill. Now, of course, as all places, especially gas stations, don't take big bills, so I politely tell him that we don't accept anything over $20 and he gives me an irritating look. Look, kid. I've been through a rough day and I don't have time for your bullshit. Take the money or I'm leaving. I once again tell him that we can't accept it and he angrily walks out of the store while kicking over our trash bin that we have in the front. Feeling a little worried and honestly a bit threatened, I place the trash bin back up and start picking up all the trash bits on the floor. When I return to my position, I look outside the window to my right and see the guy staring at me holding a fire axe. I look at him in horror for a good 5 seconds, trying to process as to what was going on before hitting this pager on the wall that alerts the police in case of a fire or a robbery. He grabs the axe that he took from the case outside and comes charging at the glass doors, shattering both of them. Keep in mind that I had only been working here for a little over a month, so I had no idea as to how to approach this. There was a gun we kept under the register in case of things like this, but I had no idea as to how to use one, and just the idea of shooting someone is horrifying. He steps inside, and I tell him that the cops are on their way. However, that didn't seem to faze him as he came toward the register and hit the counter with the axe, yelling like a madman. Thankfully, before he could do any more damage, the police arrive out with their guns drawn. Surprisingly enough, the guy tries to go after the officers and ends up getting tased by one of them. Eventually, I got questioned by one of the officers and my boss had to come in. I ended up sending in my 2-week notice and quit then and there. No more night shift duties for me. I now work as a bagger at a grocery store, and I never saw that guy again. So this happened a little over a year ago, before the global pandemic started. It is absolutely true, and is by far the most horrifying thing that's ever happened to me that nobody should ever have to witness. To start things off, I was 23 and attended art school with my girlfriend in northern Wisconsin. We both had applied to the school, and because the dorms were so expensive, we lived in an apartment which was more affordable. This was no big surprise, as the school was a private school and tuition was already enough. The only problem was that our apartment building was a good 45 minutes from our school, so we'd oftentimes find ourselves stopping to get gas either on the way to school or back. One day, I just finished my last class for the day and my girlfriend was at work, so I'd have the apartment room to myself. On my way home, I look at the fuel gauge and notice that I barely had any gas left. I own a Camaro, so my car takes up a lot of gas quickly, and driving back and forth didn't help. I pulled into the nearest gas station, which happened to be very much off the beaten path, as the area we had lived in was somewhat rural. Long story short, I pull into the gas station and walk in, but stop dead in my tracks when there was not a single soul in sight. There were no customers, no employees, and no one running the register. In fact, there weren't any cars outside other than mine. I began to look around the aisles for someone, but once again the gas station was completely empty. I was about to leave to go somewhere else, and that's when I began to notice that the lights of the bathroom was on. Upon closer inspection, I could also see that the door was slightly cracked open and there was something inside. What happened next is something straight out of a horror movie, and this is something that will never leave me. I opened the door and fell back into horror. There, sitting on the floor, was the body of what I assumed to be the clerk. His eyes were open wide, filled with fear, and his mouth hung open as his lifeless body didn't move. However, there was no blood to be found anywhere. In fact, it looked like he'd been poisoned, and it looked like he'd been dead for, at most, an hour or two. I ran out of that station so fast, getting out my phone and called the police. Long story short, the whole gas station turned into that of a crime scene. But police have still not been able to figure out why or how he got poisoned. I don't know if it was suicide or if somebody else did it to him. And frankly, I didn't want to know. Okay, so I want to point out that this isn't the type of story to make you jump out of your seat or anything. It is, however, one of the most, and possibly the most dangerous situations I've ever encountered in my life. To start things off, I'm a 17-year-old female, and this happened about a month ago. I had recently started my junior year in high school and was in the honors program, meaning I'd have a lot more homework to do than free time. For most nights of the week, I'd have so much homework and get easily stressed out that I'd have to sometimes take a break and go outside for an hour or so. I considered doing homework as my nightly routine that never stopped. One night, I had a lot of homework to catch up on, which was due the next day, and I was more stressed out than ever. I called up one of my friends and asked her if we could go somewhere just to chill out and get away from all the stress. She gladly accepted, and I told my parents that I was just taking a ride with a friend. Soon after, she had picked me up from my house, and we ended up going behind a nearby gas station for some snacks and smoke a few blunts. As we were laughing our asses off about classes, we see a man approach us, and he immediately asks us if we have an extra smoke. My friend happened to have more, so she wraps the marijuana in a $5 bill and hands it to him. He lights it, takes a few puffs, and then throws it onto the ground, stomping it. I sat there looking at the guy, confused, but could tell that my friend was furious. She angrily got up and said that she had paid a lot of money for those and that him wasting it was extremely wrong. He then starts telling her that he didn't care and that he could do whatever he wanted since she gave it to him. It was at this point when I noticed that the man had ever so slowly been reaching for something in his back pocket. I was not going to sit there to find out what it was. I told my friend that we should go and that it wasn't worth arguing with him. After a few more attempts at convincing her that we had to go, she finally obliged, and we both got in the car and I told her what I had seen him doing. We then took off down the road, and we didn't say a word to each other. I still don't know what he was reaching for in his back pocket. I don't know if it was a gun or a knife, and I'm not sure I want to know. So, this happened about 2 years ago when I used to work as a camp counselor for a Jewish community center in Florida. Every time I was on my way over to go to work, I'd always stop at a nearby gas station for my morning coffee at the little Cuban shop they had. On this particular day, I had left my house at around 7 a.m. and stopped at the gas station for some coffee and breakfast as my lunch break was 6 hours away. I grabbed my coffee and food and sit in my car to eat while listening to my radio when I noticed a woman looking at me on the bench outside of the station. At some point, she looks in my direction and we make eye contact for a second when I try to focus on my phone. But it was already too late. She comes walking over to my car and lightly taps on my window with a blank expression on her face. Based on her appearance, she looked homeless and looked like she hadn't eaten in days. I felt a bit of sympathy for her, and so I lightly rolled down the window just enough so I could hear her. She opens her mouth and says the following: "I haven't been able to see my granddaughter for months, and I can't afford money for the bus. Can you please take me to go see her?" I think to myself as to how this woman had a granddaughter. She looked to be in her mid-20s, and I felt like she was lying. Now, of course, I politely declined, telling her that I had to be somewhere and couldn't drive her. She began to break down crying in what was the worst acting I've ever seen and kept on pleading me to take her. Obviously, I wasn't going to call her out on it, and so I just kept telling her no and apologized. Eventually, it came to the point where I couldn't take it anymore and raised my voice to tell her no. She slowly lifted her head and looked at me and said 5 words that have haunted me ever since. "You made the smart decision." My eyes opened wide, and she then left back to her spot where she originally was, and I took off not looking back. I didn't call the police or mention it to anyone at work, but from that day forward, I made myself a promise that I would never visit that gas station again.